Welcome everyone. So this is Career Downloads and my name is Manuel Martinez, where every episode I basically hit the refresh button, bring on a new guest to understand more about their career. So we'll dive into their background and try to uncover any actionable items for you and really try to understand what the different guests have used, different techniques, tips that they've used to manage their career. And for today's episode, I have with me James Oravec, and we're going to dig into his background. So this is something that's of interest to me. So he is on the software side. So a software engineer, software developer. I've spent most of my time on the infrastructure side. So I know a lot of infrastructure people, networking, storage, things of that nature. So again, I'm really excited and interested to get to know a little bit more about James. So welcome, James.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No, I appreciate you coming on. So one of the first things that I want to do is if you can just, and again, we don't have to get into detail at this point, but if you can just tell me what your current role is now and just like a brief summary of what it is that you do, and then we'll work our way, to that point.
Sure. So currently I am a senior manager for software engineering. I oversee a team of developers, overseeing a number of products, which we have to go through the normal release process cycles. And that's everything from coding new features to fixing defects to security patches. And then outside of that, main goal is to wow our customers and give them something delightful to use.
That's awesome. So now the next part that I want to get into is if you can just kind of give me a little bit of background about kind of where you grew up and eventually what got you interested into technology. Like, have you always had a passion for it? Again, we don't have to go into detail, but just like a summary, were you that kind of kid that, had a computer at the age of 5 and that drove you, or, was it later on in life?
It's an interesting question because there's just so much that has transpired in maybe different directions I could have gone. So I'll even go back to as far back as I remember. When I was a kid, like elementary school, first job I wanted to be was a cop. My dad kind of talked me out of that. Then I wanted to be a dentist. And then after that, I don't know why I wanted to be a dentist, but I think it was just, hey, make some money and things of that nature. And then one day my mom, who was working as a checker, she was talking about some guy who came in and was fixing either an ATM machine or something of that nature, something to do with computers. And at the time, this was a real long time ago, he was making $50 an hour to do this. And I was like, oh, wow, that's a lot of money. So I was like, I want to get into computers. So that's what kind of shifted me into that kind of mindset. As far as what got me or kept me there, I think when I was a kid, I was exposed to computers. Started with the Apple IIe, like way back in the early '80s. So the big actual floppy disk, and you got to boot to
three, like the 5-inch.
A 5 1/4, yeah, 5 1/4, right? 3.5 and then 5 1/4. Yeah. So it wasn't like the 8-inch ones, but it was the 5-inch ones. But so I did that and I enjoyed it. And my dad was taking like college courses, so he was writing programs that my brother and I would be playing. So it would be like guess a number or guess an animal and kind of go through that. So I kind of enjoyed that. I wasn't opposed or it didn't feel unfamiliar to me, to say the least. When I went through middle school, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, they had some technology courses and some computer courses, and I ended up getting the computer medal for the school in my 8th grade. And I was actually kind of curious why, and I ended up finding out that I had the highest percentage of all the students of all the different classes that took it. So that was how I ended up getting that. In my early teens, I'd say probably about 13 or so, my dad signed my mom up for some courses to learn just general computer skills. So at the time, instead of like Microsoft like Word and the suite that you would be at the time. Lotus was popular, so you had like Lotus 123 instead of Excel. You had AmniPro instead of Microsoft Word, etc. So what occurred was my dad negotiated to get it so that my brother and I could get the courses for free if he signed up for my mom. Through his sales tactics, he got it so that I got all the courses for free. And then I ended up over the course of the summer taking like every course that they had to offer, like every day, like 5 days a week, go there, take the course. So they had beginning, intermediate, and advanced. That then led to where I started to find little side jobs, like in the neighborhood where someone's computer wouldn't work or something of that nature. So this was probably mid 90s, and I would charge like $15 an hour, which was a fantastic deal for the people, because if they went to Circuit City or Best Buy or anything at the time, I think they charged somewhere between $50 to $75 an hour. So that you could do the neighborhood kid at $15 an hour, which was great money for me, or you could try it. So I ended up getting a decent amount of work. Helped tutor, train, helped fix, and then.
And this was all just word of mouth. You know, once you kind of got a reputation for like one or two people.
Yep.
Were you going and actually marketing, or is it just word spread?
I think probably what occurred was my dad was like in sales for most of his life. So he would always be talking to people, and as they would talk, if they had like a computer issue or something, he'd be like, oh yeah, my son can. So I actually had like a salesperson always there looking out, and then word of mouth after that, because now you get one person that you help that says, oh yeah, I know someone, and then next thing you know, you get a decent amount of side money, or not bad for a side hustle. So but yeah, the main thing was trying to have enough skills, and my main thing was like a lot of the time was if I didn't know it, that was okay. I would play with it long enough until I could figure it out and get it to fix. And for the longest time in my career, especially when I was young, my thing was, if you pull me in to help work on something, you only pay me if I fix the problem. Meaning that, so my motivation is I'm going to fix your problem, because otherwise I don't get paid. So, and then sometimes if it was like a really tough problem, say it took me, I don't know, 5 hours, 6 hours, and I thought it should be more like 2 or 3, then I would only charge for 2 or 3 hours, because when I was having when I started doing the higher rates, then that's where like I would come in at the higher, but then I would make sure that the customer always felt like they got more than what they were paying for.
And was that just kind of a way to establish a good relationship with the customer, or did you at the time, and I understand that you were relatively young, but were you using it also as, well, I can't ask them to pay me to learn, so I'll just charge them for the time that I'm actually spent fixing their problem? Was that kind of the mindset?
So to give it like a more modern type deal, like if I went and I was to help someone, if I was to charge them, say, $110 an hour or $120 an hour now, someone's not paying me $110 or $120 an hour to learn. At that rate, it's already expected that I know whatever it is. So as a like software engineer for most of my career, and then like I've been pretty fungible where I've had to learn a lot of cross training. So some of the infrastructure, like when I had my War Toys business, I had to set up my own servers, had to co-locate them, even had to T1 lines at one point. So there's a lot that goes into it. Excuse me. So the main thing though is like if I'm charging someone for the rate, I'm not going to putz around for 10 hours when it should be something that's going to be an hour or two's worth of work. And if I did putz around with that, then that kind of ruins some of my own reputation for that repeat or where the customers come back. And normally I'm so busy that it's very rare that I'm doing side work now. That it's um, normally like I make really good money with what I currently do. So it's put the time and effort into the main job, and then normally if like a friend's got a company or something and they need help or support, then that's where this kind of comes into play. But the main thing is like I'm not looking to charge or overgouge. It's about building and maintaining those relationships.
Nice. So you did that for, I'm assuming, for a while, because at some point I saw that you kind of started your own business. So is that the business that you're talking about, or just
no, yeah. So I'll transition, or I'll fill in some more of the gaps. So that was my about mid-teens, and then after the mid-teens, in my teens, my best friend from high school, we were both into computers, and we were like, hey, let's become hackers or whatever. So we got really into not only computers but actual phone technology and stuff of that nature. So, and then in high school, I was doing a part-time thing where half the school was my normal schooling, and then half the time was a trade school. So I did electronics and then computer tech. So I got had exposure to like alligator clips and soldering and all that stuff. So make like a beige box with a ring and tip, and then like open up the wall socket, and when they had the landlines, and be able to make phone calls and do all sorts of craziness. And then so with that, that's where I ended up going to the library, kind of getting all the different books that I could, read a ton of stuff on computers. So this was in addition to the stuff that I had with the training courses that I got from, I think they were called New Horizon at the time. And then after that, graduated high school. After I graduated high school, I went and I took two certificates. I got my A+ certification, and I got my certified Novell administrator. So that was my first first certifications. And then it was weird because, like, if I was to go back in time, I graduated with a 4.166 GPA. I should have applied to places, but I don't know that I had the guidance to apply to the good colleges when I should have, and the whole process that was behind that. So with that, there was a couple things that happened that summer after I graduated. One was, like, my dad was like, "Are you going to get a job?" And then, "Are you going to apply for college?" So I said, "Okay." So I went down to UNLV. And this was like 3 weeks before their admissions, and I remember the registrar like so much attitude, like looking at me like, "Oh, you're looking to apply to get into UNLV when it starts in 3 weeks." And I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "Okay," like sigh. Let me see your transcripts, and it was like the 4.166. And she goes, "Welcome to UNLV." So that's when I was like, maybe I undershot because it was like so much sass and so much attitude. And then having a strong GPA reflected well. Then in parallel of that, I was looking to try to get my first job. Well, my first job was putting together computers at a little local computer shop. So actually, like, assemble computers, put the chips on the motherboards and all that stuff. And then I did that for a winter, like a winter break for my senior year. So then my first, what I'd say, real job, because extended period of time, was doing tech support for Floor Daniel. And I ended up doing that over MicroAge, and they became UPS Teleservices while I was there, and they got bought out. So that was interesting because I didn't know how to apply or how to do a resume or whatever it was. So instead of having like your standard 1, 2, maybe 3 pages resume, my resume at the age of 18 was, I think, 12 pages. So
Wow.
So, but it listed. So this was where I was using like my. I knew how to do the different fonts and all that stuff, so I created this thing that listed all the different courses that I took, and I was faxing it to them, and I get a phone call like 2 or 3 minutes like into it. They say, "Hey, are you available to interview?" And I was like, "Has my resume come all the way through?" It was still printing on their side because it was so long. But it was pretty funny because though, and the way that I got this lead was when I was going to the certification places. They had a billboard that had potential jobs. So they had 3 jobs that had 3 different amounts, and it actually showed the dollar amount. And I think, if memory serves me correctly, at the time, this entry level, first level tech support was paying $10.58. So, and I mentioned that because parallel of everything going on, I have in high school I did ROTC for 4 years, became battalion commander, so the highest ranked, and I still had people from the military trying to talk me into joining and all that stuff. And when I was talking to them, they were saying, "Hey, yeah, you come, we'll pay for your college, you'll become a second lieutenant after 4 years of college, and then you'll make 20,000 a year." And I'm like sitting there, I'm thinking, so you're telling me I have to come in, go through college for 4 years, and then get paid less than what I can make now doing tech? And I'm like, no, thank you. So, so that was kind of like my clear way of making sure that I was going into tech. And then doing the tech support, I remember the manager who first hired me. So this is what was also interesting is I started at the very end or the cusp of the age cutoff. So when I was applying for the job, I was 17, almost 18. So I wasn't 18 yet, so I couldn't be treated like as an adult. So my manager, when he was interviewing me, he goes, "Hey, yeah, my like impressive resume. I like what I see. My biggest concern is around reliability and commitment for like young age." So he said, "If you give me your word that you'll stick to this for 2 years and you'll do this," and then we're pretty much like at the end. It was like that was the final conversation we had. I said, "Absolutely." So like I really made sure that I was like 2 years. I will make sure I stay true to my word. And he was a funny guy. So he when we first met, his first question he goes, "Can you tell me how you change the oil of sea moss?" And I'm like sitting there, I'm thinking, oil of a sea moss, and and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, and like my brain's trying to piece it together because he just gave me like one of those things that doesn't go together. So at Circuit City, I remember they had like internet oil exchange, which was like some application for helping like clean up the browsers and the cookies and all that stuff, like way back when. And I was like sitting there and I started talking. I was like, I know this and I know the CMOS and the BIOS and stuff, but I have no clue how they come together. And so he was testing me out to see if I would bullshit my way through like some sort of answer or if I would give some sort of context. And I took things very literal at that time. So it took me a while to like understand, like, and then afterwards it was like a series of things. He took me through the office, and while we were walking through, someone was having an issue. So he ended up like pulling up the terminal, started to do ping to try to like troubleshoot like world turn, and I and this was around the time where like prior is like lots of dial-ups, and I was just starting to get into the network, so I didn't even know what ping was at the time. So I got to learn and see what it was, and I was very eager to learn because I want to learn more. So I think that was like a good sign of just showing the interest in learning, and that went a long way. So sorry, that was a bit of a story. So that got me my tech support job. I ended up taking that serious. They gave us a script that was like, "Hey, this is your intro, and then this is how you handle the middle part, and then this is your final part." And they had a quality control with that, where if you didn't do these certain things, you don't get the points. And if they listen in and you do all these things, then you get like a punch card, and the punch card would go from $5 McDonald's to like a $10 gift card for something else, all the way up to like a $100 gift card. And then part of my question was, well, what happens after that? And I found out that it resets. So then you go back to $5, and then you go all the way back up to the $100. But I just went through. Seemed like it was very straightforward. They started to nickname me the robot because I was so systematic with how I did it. So.
And that script, was it just because it sounded, if I understood correctly, it's like a help desk type job?
Yep. Yep.
And the script was just to try and understand what the problem is. So
Welcome to Floor Daniel. My name is James Oravec. How may I help you today?
got it. So it's that type of script. It's not like, hey, this is the problem, or have you tried rebooting? It wasn't something like that.
No.
It wasn't a troubleshooting script. It was like an introductory,
Yep.
like, hey, introduce yourself, make sure you're answering the question, and at the end.
Yeah, and they had
thanks.
things like, so it'd be like, during the call, it'd be like, may I get your name? You say Manuel. I say, oh, well, nice to meet you, Manuel. How can I help you today? I got to say your name, I think 3 to 5 times. I forget what the number was during the call. So what would occur is then it made it more personable. And then at the end, it was like, thank you for calling the Floor Daniel Help Desk. Hope you have a wonderful day. And it was something around those lines. And I apologize if I missed the QA guy may ding me these days.
No, and that's fine. And then that's helpful to understand. So it sounds like he really wanted to make sure that whoever was calling in was getting I'm assuming like a consistent experience. They felt like they were being heard and
Yes.
and not just somebody that's getting, like most places you call through right now, like, hey, how's it going? Okay, great. What's the problem, right? It wasn't like a fast food drive-through line where they're just trying to shovel people through.
Yeah.
He wanted to make sure.
So they did look at metrics outside of the quality. So the quality was a big portion of this. But what the management would also look at is the throughput of how long does it take you to do your calls. So even if you got a 5-star on your quality review, if you're averaging 20 minutes to solve or help customers, that's a lot longer than otherwise. So between my consistent on the quality, then it became a question of how long does it take to resolve the issues. So they had it's unfortunate because I don't think that everybody else was as engaged as I was or taking it as serious. So I think my average call volume was, or call length was about 6.5 minutes or something of that nature. So it was like really small compared to the rest of the team. And because of that and the high quality, they had these larger prizes where I ended up getting the High Performer Award for the company because of the volume plus how many times I got the quality stuff. So I guess taking it serious, trying to actually connect with the customers, give them a good experience, and solve their problems was key for this particular role. While I was working there, this is when I started my first side business. And that started because we went to see my parents' insurance. I guess he was my insurance guy too for my car. And he was sitting there and he was telling me he's had this problem on his computer for about 3 weeks. So I ended up going into MS config and removing some of the startup stuff, and it was solved within like 2-3 minutes, and he was like super impressed. So he goes, do you do websites? And this is like at the very, World Wide Web's just first coming out and everything else. And I heard stories that Bill Gates didn't have the stuff before he did, but figured he could figure it out or whatever it was. So I said, I don't know, but I'll figure it out. So this ended up getting me introduced to a chiropractor who wanted to create a website called war-toys.com. Or I'm sorry, World War Toys was his. So he wanted to create World War Toys. He had the domain reserved already. And it was a question of like, what would it take to do like a shopping cart? So, this is me coming out of high school, doing my $15 an hour, thinking, okay, well, probably take about 20 hours or something. I don't know how long it'd take. Had no clue how long it would take. So I ended up quoting him $300. He jumped all over it. And then I ended up spending about 3 months figuring it out and buying a different, like a shopping cart program out there, figuring out how to connect it, set it up, and do all that. So I ended up spending about $350. So net negative $50. But what it ended up happening was I set it up so that I was getting the monthly co-hosting like type fees. So I ended up getting a monthly
Like a residual.
that was always positive, which made up for the fact that I went negative at the very get-go, because long term I was making money month over month to help maintain and look and patch and all that stuff. So that was fun. So that was, hey, learn how to do some co-locating stuff back in the day, where it's not not the 5 minutes. Hey, you spin up a EC2 instance like nowadays. This was like you actually had to have hardware or find hardware or find someone who had that so that you can co-locate, etc.
And is that, at that point, that sounds like it's probably the first, like a first introduction to the software side, right? And when I say software, meaning more software development, right? Like having to build a website as opposed to software like the OS level, like troubleshooting.
Yeah. I think in high school there was I had very limited exposure where we had some basic type code for tracking some grades and stuff at like an ROTC, but as far as actual like real code or exposure, this was it. And it was classic ASP, and they used or connected to an Access database. And that was entertaining because eventually World War Toys was going, and the owner was making so much money doing chiropractic that it didn't make sense to continue as the side business. So I said, hey, can I buy your business? And then I talked to my dad and said, hey, can you, in essence, finance, and then I'll do the tech side of it. So my dad said yes. So we ended up pretty much buying the company for pretty much all of his inventory at cost, and that helped him just clear out and get out of the business, so he didn't want to do anything. But we didn't know if there was any pending customer orders or things of that nature, so we wanted to do like a rebrand and kind of like start off like a new company. So this is where I reserved the domain war-toys.com, and then started to build that. In between there, there was a stint where I was trying to run my own business, which was programming like websites and things of that nature. It seemed like everybody and their brother wanted to have a website, web presence, but they didn't really know why. So it was like, hey, you can create this web page that says this information, it's sitting there, but then they don't have anybody like coming to it or driving business or getting anything actionable out of that. And that was a concern, because what was occurring was I found that as I was meeting new customers, I was going through the same spiel of saying, hey, this is why you want to do it, because like you need to be able to drive the business, you need to be able to do something, and if you're not doing that, you're not making money, which like what is the purpose of the website at that point? So
it just becomes a billboard that nobody's probably paying attention to as they're driving by, something like that.
Exactly. And that was interesting, because now I have to explain the thing, and I refer to it as like pulling teeth, because it was just really painful having to go through the same thing over and over. And then on the flip side, at the time I had those sidecar magnets, because we're talking about people doing different things. I got 0 phone calls from the sidecar magnets with the advertising, like the billboards you're talking about that everybody ignores. So I don't know if anybody else has had luck with getting actual customers to call off of this, but that was a couple $100 just wasted. But I figured I'd mention it because you're talking about the billboards. So going from World War, or from my...
So I don't mean to interrupt you here, but real quick. So then, if you're telling everybody else build a website, drive traffic, you know, you mentioned about the little car magnets. I do remember, like, my dad had his business and he threw them on there. Did you have a website for your business
I
at
did.
that point?
I did.
And was that help kind of contrasting? Do you think that that helped drive business to you, or
No.
it didn't either?
No, it was the same. Like I think I may have had 2 or 3 people kind of ping or reach out, but just about everybody and their brother were like, "Oh, hey, I can build you a website or build a website for $99 or whatever it was." So short of the word of mouth or the network that I had, I wasn't getting any real connections. And then the input or the feedback or the connections I was getting, it was like so painful to try to make any money because you'd have to align to like what the scope of work would be, etc. And it was just painful. So this is where the shift or the pivot from that idea to how can I apply what I've been trying to tell everybody onto my own actual website for selling with the e-commerce. So numbers, to put it in perspective, the number of orders that World War Toys did in a year, we were getting that in less than a week at one point. So the scale that we ended up doing, and we had, this was early times where things weren't really programmed yet. So even, so I'll talk through some of the stuff where, so, okay, I guess I'll give a little bit more details into this because it was like mom and pop shop selling action figures online. The unique aspect of the business was that the action figures could be broke down, and then you could sell the uniforms separate from the weapons, separate from the figures. And then what that did was it increased how much you sold everything for. So going from like a 30% profit margin to like a 300%, but it took time. And in that process, then somebody coming to the website to buy can put together a unique squad of figures. So like if they served in the military or something and they wanted to recreate their squad that they served with, they could do that. So this is where that flexibility, like it was a win-win for how the model worked. When we first started though, there was a lot of pain points because we had the Avery 2x5 printouts for the sticky labels that we'd put on the boxes. So we had to figure out like how do you do the shipping. So just doing the address in itself, people would get the printed out piece of paper, retype the address, and that was taking time. Where if you looked at how much time every day, it was 5-10 minutes every time that somebody was going through this. So I was like, okay, well, I need a program where I need to automate this. So I went through, figured out how to create a template that I could copy and paste into the Avery template, and then I could print, and to get it so that it would actually align, so that if I already printed 4, that I could print to the next 6, etc. So that is where I started to look at, I think, some of the business operations aspects. And so it was not just, hey, here's the technical aspect as like a software engineer, but also how does this affect operations? Where do we put the time? So I always had like a 2-page list of items, and I'd have to try to force rank to say, hey, this is going to save us the most time if I did this first, if I did this. So we ended up, I did some pretty cool stuff for the time. So the printing of the labels and then getting it so that we then connect into like USPS so that we can get the tracking codes and all that stuff. So those were like some of the shipping aspects. For the logistics,
And
like
and during that time, so as you're going through, and like you mentioned, the business operations, that's just something that, is it still just you doing all the operations during this time, or did you have a group of people? Like I'm just curious the scale, because
yeah,
you know, as a single individual, I can understand where you're like, okay, this is terrible, right? This is taking me a long time. I want to automate this part, or I want to improve this, and having a list is, I mean, it's almost like a, if you think at it now, it's almost like a mini, like, if you think of like Scrum or like project, not almost like a project plan, but like on a smaller scale.
like a roadmap.
Like a roadmap.
Yeah.
So was it just you trying to improve and not have to spend as much time doing this yourself? Or you mentioned it was 12x the amount of, orders that you're getting. So I'm wondering, did you start to kind of hire somebody and say, hey,
No,
you're taking too long?
Well, well, I'll get to some of the numbers and the scales that we got to, and I can talk freely about this because it was my own business. Um, the you had a couple questions. One of the questions was who was it? So I partnered with my dad, which then meant that my dad, my mom, myself, and my brother were helping. So in our house, we started, we took over the two-car garage, lined it up with shelving that had like 4 or 5 tiers all around the outside. Then we had center things. And then after we took over the garage, then we took over the living room, part of the family room, and then we took over the loft, which had all the computer stuff. So the number of hours that were going into this, so I started this when I was doing my tech support job. So this was a side hustle. And then the side hustle got to the point where I was making so much money doing more on the side hustle. I was like, hey, does it make sense that I'm still working my real job when I can put that time into this business instead? So we got aligned, no, it makes sense, do it full time. But even
And this is after your 2 years of commitment to them?
Yeah. So I did my 2 years, and then in that time period, it was interesting because when the business first started, I was telling them, oh yeah, I'm learning how to do this stuff on my own or on the side, and I ended up getting promoted to second level. And when I got promoted to second level, that impacted me because of the performance that I was telling you about. I ended up getting first pick of like what shift I wanted. So the shift I ended up picking was, I think, 10 a.m. to midnight, or like 11 a.m. to midnight, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Every other Friday they had off, so you didn't get a huge volume of calls over the weekend. So it was just like a skeleton crew, but we still had to be there. You had to like, so it was normally like who really knows their stuff can help provide that support. So since we didn't have a huge call volume, that provided me the opportunity to have books that I could read. So this is where I could read like SQL and all that stuff. So it wasn't me just sitting there being idle or wherever it is. I had to like get myself engaged in how to do this. And then that knowledge allowed me to like understand how to do the programming a little bit deeper, how to understand like SQL inquiries and data and things of that nature. And that's kind of like where things started to go. Then when I got promoted, they wanted me more through like a Monday through Friday type shift, which then gave me a larger call volume as well. And then it took away from my ability to study on my own. So I got like super busy with that. So it was, so at that point, that shifted my ability to continue to learn. So I had to like make the choice, one or the other. So I forget what it was, 2.5 or 3 years into it, ended up quitting. Then I focused full time on my war toys, which was already producing money. And then that was fun because that took me from 40-hour weeks to like 80-hour weeks. but I used to tell people, I said I'd rather work 80 hours for myself than 40 hours for someone else. And that took a lot, but I learned so much. We went from co-locating to Access could only support so many connections at a time. So we grew the business to the point where Access could not serve as the database anymore. And I was co-locating or working with someone else, and they weren't able to help fix it. So I ended up buying my own server from Dell, figuring out how to configure, set up the DNS and all that, like the whole full web server with physical hardware. Pinged a couple buddies who had some ideas of the things, and so it was very like network. I don't know this, but we'll figure it out. Went through the process, to get it set up, and then I set up my own co-locating with I don't remember the name of the company, but they had some house over off of I think Eastern and Russell or something like over there. It was just some co-location thing. It was like literally a house where they had all the fibers. So I went in there, put my server on a makeshift, so not like a real rack, like here's a shelf in essence. So I put it there, put my Linksys router on top of that as my firewall, connected it, and then got our static IPs and off and run. So
that's interesting. So just out of a house, so I'm assuming it's just probably just wire shelves, and you're just seeing equipment everywhere, and then
no, it'd be
wasn't even that.
Yeah, so if you had this room, and say it was mostly empty, and then you had like 3 shelves at the back, that's what it was. So it was this shell of a house that had the data, and I think what occurred was they had a bigger data provider or network provider that came through and bought them out. So they were still offering it as like a co-location for their old customers, etc. But yeah, it was weird times, late 90s, early 2000s. So once I had my own server, then it was a question of how do I get the shopping cart system off of Access into something that can support something better. So I ended up going from Access to MS SQL. And the reason why I did that was because the shopping cart was using VB script with classic ASP, so it was a Windows-based type solution. So I had to pay a bunch of money for the license for the SQL, but then the syntax changes slightly between when you're accessing when you're getting data from Access versus SQL, MS SQL. Like the date format's a little bit different and things of that nature. So I had to go through the whole code base, find out all the different entry points of what variants were there, made all the different code updates, got it so that it started running. And then after that, we didn't have the database locking issues anymore because MS SQL was able to support the number of connections for the customers that we were running into. So,
and that figuring out that the differences, are you just trial and error? I know you mentioned before that you're a big reader. So did you read and try to understand? I'm just curious what the thought process was, or how you went about trying to figure something like that out, because it's newer, right? At that time,
yeah.
There's no Google. You can't just Google, hey, what are the differences? It spits it out. Or
Yeah.
ChatGPT, hey, what are the differences? How do I code this differently?
Yeah.
It's more a manual process.
Yeah, I don't 100% know when Google came out, but this was either right around the time Google was coming out, which means it wasn't that great yet.
Or it was probably still Yahoo.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we had Yahoo, Alta Vista, and several others, and like even the web page optimization and to try to get your SEO type stuff. So I had to go through like different series of all that stuff too. But your question of how did I figure that out was when I tried to connect it to the new database, things weren't working and it was giving an error, and it would say the error was around whatever the date was. So I ended up having, I think I had 3 different SQL books, like really thick books. And the first time I went through to teach myself, I went through a big SQL book where it's mostly syntax and things of that nature. So it wasn't doesn't sound as terrible, but I read that in the course of a weekend. So I just went through and it's like 30 hours, boom, get through the book and go from there. Then I had the foundation. I knew where, kind of like an index of where things were. And then as I went back through, I probably ended up reading that book probably 3-4 times. And then in addition, they had like W3 schools and things of that nature. So I went through like the SQL training on that multiple times. Fantastic tool even today. Anytime I want to brush up on HTML, CSS, JavaScript, or like
even SQL commands. I've used that a few times just for SQL commands. I'm like, man, I know how to do this, or I remember the command. It's been a little while.
Yep.
Just like you said, it's a good refresher.
Yep. So your I don't know if W3, I know that I've used it several times, but I don't know at the time that I was doing the conversion that I was aware of it or that it was around. So the books were the main thing, figuring it out. Uh, and it was like, uh, what? They used to sell Mountain Dew in the 24 packs, the cube. So you give me that and let me, work on stuff from 8 p.m. until 3 a.m. Like there tends to be a lot of magic that can happen in that time period.
And, and you bring up something I know early on in both of our careers and many other people I've talked to is, reading books. Now there's videos, there's all kinds of different ways to kind of learn skill sets, learn applications. Do you still see value in reading a book on a particular technology?
So I will probably take this a step deeper because as I've progressed in my career and I've got to meet a lot of very successful people, the most successful people I know tend to read a book a week. So, so some things you can be technical, some things don't have to be technical. For me, what I started to do and I really enjoy is Audible, and it's because I can listen and I can process better audible versus like visual. So I'm a little bit slower reader. I still comprehend like really well, but it takes me a lot longer to digest with reading versus Audible. So I got over like 100 books on my Audible, and um, those kind of books can help you like from the management, from the leadership, from understanding different techniques or items, whatever it is. You want to learn something about AI, they got books on AI. They got books on just about everything. You want clean architecture, they got that. So your 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 question, I think in general, is if you're trying to learn something, your intent or your goal should be to try to be the best at whatever you do. And the reason why you want to be the best at whatever you do is whoever is the best tends to make the most money or makes so if you're looking at it from like a competitive or from a financial reward, it's one thing that if you have like an entry level cert, but if you got some mega corporation that needs to do like a big data center or they got to do something, they will pay the money to have the people who really know what the hell they're doing to perform that. And this is the reason, like in tech, like you can get entry level positions, maybe 65,000. You can go to like mid tier, maybe 100, 120. Your seniors, maybe you're 150, 175, 180, or thereabouts. The staff and principal engineers, it goes up, and maybe you're in the 200s. But if you look at like your FANG type companies, your Facebook, your Amazon, your Apple, your Netflix, your Google, I know Facebook's Meta now, but still the FANG acronym I like. If you go to levels.fyi, that to me is one of the best salary indications where people put in information. You can see the salary ranges of these very large type companies. And when you see the compensation, like if you can get to like principal engineer level at like Google or Meta or any of these type of companies, you can make over $1 million a year. So the difference of, hey, here's $100,000 job versus, hey, here's $1 million a year job, where most of that comes in the form of RSUs or something of that form, that's pretty significant. So I mentioned that because that intent to become the best is going to pave you the path to get there. And then if you are doing this, it's a question of how many different ways can you learn or be exposed to what you're trying to learn. So part of that is reading, part of it is conversations and interactions with others, part of it is doing the hands-on. Sometimes if you watch the video versus if you listen to an Audible versus if you read a book, these are all different ways that we can intake and learn that information. And I would say, and apologize if it seems like I'm rambling, but They got Jim Quick has a book, I believe it's called Limitless. And he goes through the details of saying these are things that you could do to actually learn and how to learn in an effective, quick type way. And I believe in that book, he also suggests reading the book every week. So I recommend that book for anybody who wants to learn it, because that, like, if you really want to be like the best in what you do, like, competition's like tough.
Right, and I'm glad you brought it up, and you mentioned like a lot of different things, and it's true, right? People learn differently, they process information differently. But even if you do, I think, if you're focusing on something specific, right? Like, hey, you mentioned AI. Hey, I want to understand AI. Can I watch a video about it and understand it? Sure. Could I read a book about it? Yes. Can I also listen to something? Most definitely. But to your point, like, if you want to be the best, if you're seeing, and I think this is where people in tech are looking to move, make a jump, sometimes maybe you have to do all three, right? And I think now with the fact that we're able to get information so quickly, right? Well, I can just Google that. Well, you can get the answer, but you can't get extensive knowledge, right? To be the best, to be these people, and I know that right now, especially cybersecurity is like the hot topic, right? Cybersecurity, oh, I'm gonna get into cybersecurity. Sure, you can, and a lot of times I've seen boot camps pop up everywhere. People are like, oh, I want to get into cybersecurity, and that's a question I've gotten asked a lot. Like, well, how do I get in there? Hey, where I don't see a lot of these entry level jobs. I'm like, okay, they're there. I'm sure there are. I don't think that boot camps are necessarily a bad thing, right? I mean, it's a quick way to get exposure, but I think the misconception is I get through this boot camp and I'm going to have enough to land an entry level job. And
Yep.
I would say that that's it, and I'm very interested to get your opinion. I don't think that's the case. Again, let's say even it's 3 months. 3 months is not enough time to say, okay, I am a cybersecurity expert. I really understand this.
Yeah. So I agree with what you're saying. And the reason why I look at this is my degree is in computer science. And at the time, a very serious degree, STEM oriented, going through this, but not something easy. So every week you're putting in maybe 50, 60 hours going through all the coursework, plus the take homes, plus the programming assignments, etc. So if you do that over the course of 4 years, and then you think that you can somehow dwindle that down into 8 weeks, you're being a little silly. And over the course of that extended period of time of learning, you're getting deeper insights to these different items or these aspects, or you understand things at a deeper level. I think from like a boot camp perspective, if it's like a refresher or it's specific to like a particular technology or topic or something, that may actually be cool to complement something like a 4-year degree, but it by itself is going to be hard. Now, I pause and I'm hesitant on this because I know some people that never got a degree that actually became very successful as well. But you are up against trying to get your foot in the door to be able to prove that you can perform and you can do, like, if I'm the hiring manager and I'm looking at you, do you have the qualifications? Do you have the personality traits that I know that if I give you something that it's going to be done successfully in the proper way? And if all you have is a certificate or a 6-week boot camp or 8-week boot camp or something of that nature, that becomes a lot more risky for me versus me saying, hey, I can spend a little bit more, someone who has a degree or whatever it is, and I can hire them. So it's like a risk management type perspective. And you just put yourself in the perspective of the person hiring and say, what would they do? Now, the question is, and I think the first 2 years, even with a 4-year degree, it becomes very difficult because you need to get your foot in the door somewhere to be able to get paid decently. And then I think that after you have 2 years under your belt plus your degree, you now have enough foundation that when you go to apply to other places, they'll take you more seriously because you've now been you have industry experience in addition to the college, which means that you should have a lot of the foundations in place.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is probably I know a few people, like you mentioned, that don't have the degree that have been successful, but it's similar. It took them a while to get in, and I don't know many people, so I think that these are kind of more unique cases.
Yes.
Is where they've gone through and instead of spending the 2 years, let's say going to college, they might have spent that year or that time building something and really learning technology. It's not like, hey, I went through a boot camp. It's okay, hey, I want to know cybersecurity. Okay, well, I'm learning networking.
Yep.
Understanding it. They're reading those books.
Yep.
And I think there's a huge advantage now. Like when you talked about first getting in, like a website, right? It was basic HTML. You couldn't do a lot of, if you wanted to spin up a server, you touched on it at one point, right? You couldn't just spin up an EC2 instance and have it running and test whatever you want. Now I think you have the advantage. I think a lot of people, whether you're just starting or you've been in there for a while, is if I want to get into cybersecurity, I can dedicate the time, I can read and build something. So even though I'm not working in that industry, you can have something visual. To your point, if I send you as a hiring manager, okay, this person has a degree, they've got 2 years experience. Okay, this person, maybe they picked up a certificate or two, but look, they've got a link to a website. They're explaining what they've built.
Yep.
That makes it easier for somebody. Again, it's been a while since I've been on the manager hiring side, but I would think that something like that would be almost just as appealing. It makes it a little bit more difficult where maybe you bring both people in and now you're talking to them to find out, okay, on paper, this is what I see, but now talking to you, let me go through and see, okay, this website that they spun up, did they just copy paste a lot of code? Were they just following? Or did they actually take the time to learn it and understand it and speak to it?
Yes, and I would say you touch on something which I think is really key, is at the very initial get-go, how do you distinguish yourself from the others? And if you have side projects or you have a portfolio where you can say, hey, here's a demo of a website that I built. If that demo is impressive, that gives you a much better chance of getting hired. And I know at one of the places where I was working, I wasn't a manager, but I was more like a lead engineer. And so I was involved in some of the interview process. And the person, like, I wasn't impressed with the resume, etc. But they had their laptop and say, here's my portfolio. And they showed me some of the websites they developed. And I was looking through this, I was like, this is pretty nice. This is pretty awesome. So that then got them through to the next steps to do some additional interviews, and they ended up getting hired. So I would say initially, if you're going down the road of not having the degree or the boot camp, you need to have a really strong portfolio of something that you can demo that helps convey to the hiring manager that you will be able to be successful in that role, in that position. And if your presentation is something mediocre, you're probably not going to get it. But if you present and it looks like, oh yeah, you're at the top, I think always shoot for the top 10%, if not higher. And if you can present at that level, then that's going to make your interviews a lot easier.
And I apologize. I know I kind of sidetracked you a little bit, and we started talking about how you learn. But I think that everything you provided is, it's extremely beneficial. So we don't have to jump all the way back, but now at some point you're growing your business, you're learning all these new skills, you're doing this. What makes you decide to not continue building that? Because and I apologize,
Sure.
I don't remember exactly how long. I know it was quite a while that you ran that business, but at some point you decided to kind of split ways and go work for somebody else. So what made you either make that decision, have the confidence to do it?
Yeah. So I'll continue. So War Toys was fantastic. Ended up building up the company. We ended up having a storefront over here off of Torrey Pines and Sahara, so like not too far away. And there it was a 1,200 square foot storefront. So we had ended up working so much out of our house and always being surrounded in the business that it'd be like, hey, wake up, shower, work, and then work until like 11 p.m., go to bed. And then it got to the point where I think we'd normally take Christmas off. So as far as the year goes, as far as the startup goes, imagine one day a year that you actually take off. After a couple years, that became very taxing, and we wanted to have like some separation. So we ended up saying we need to get a storefront. So we ended up getting the storefront so we can move everything out of the house and actually have like our own separate home from versus like where we're working. So we weren't always thinking or stressed. From there, as part of the lessons learned was we were seeing some various things with inventory. And we weren't sure if it was the software or if it was sometimes people would want to walk around and look at the inventory. So you had the risk that somebody could be shoplifting, etc. So what we ended up doing is created a small area up front, which had a couple computers where you could use the website, order the stuff, and then we would pick the order and then we'd bring it to you and deliver. As the business continued to grow, right behind there's a storage unit place. So I think we had 7 storage units at one point, and we ended up, when I did the calculations, like most successful businesses turn the inventory about once a year. We were turning our inventory over 7 times a year. So the scale of this stuff was pretty massive. We started to realize this when we had a senior VP from Blue Box Toys that called my dad and was trying to talk with him and everything else. And he would talk to him regularly. So my dad was like, hey, why are you talking? And he goes, well, you're our... So Blue Box was our second biggest category of sales, where our first one was about 3-4 times bigger. And he let us know that we were their second largest customer, only second to KB Toys, who had the 200 locations in all the malls across the country. So we're like, oh, okay. So we're starting to put together, oh, hey, we actually have the volume. We're doing stuff. We're doing well. We're at the point where we're trying to I bought a H2 Hummer and put War Toys on the side. So at that point, I used that because the Hummer weighed over 6,000 pounds. So we could actually use that as a business deduction and start to write it off. So we started, things like this were occurring, and this is like in my early 20s. So the business continues to grow, and then our lease is coming due at the location, and amongst all this, I'm going to college full time, so I can be covered by my so I could be covered by insurance with my parents until I'm 24, and then I'm also trying to complete. I'm taking courses of whatever interests me that I think will be applicable to my business. So I'm not just doing computer science. I'm doing business courses. I'm doing marketing courses, and if I see courses like psychology of dreams, I'm taking those. So I apologize because this is like a big kind of like chaos is what it kind of seems like. But I went to my counselor or advisor at it was CCSN at the time, and I said, hey, I'm hoping you can tell me how many degrees I have, which made them like, what do you mean? Like it was an awkward question. So then I presented my transcripts, and I had like 178 credits at the time. So they're like, let me take this home over the weekend, and I'll be back to you. So when we reconnected, they're like, okay, you have 3 associates and you're 12 credits shy of a 4th. Do you want to pursue the 4th? I was like, no, I need to start focusing, finish off my bachelor's and go from there. So During this time, all this is going on. The lease is coming due. We try to renew, but the hair salon place right next to it wanted to expand, and they were good customers with the landlord. So the landlord said, "Hey, no, we're not going to renew," or whatever it was. So we ended up having to relocate from the storefront back to a different house, a little bit bigger house, and everything else. But we did that shift. During this time, it was a question of, hey, why don't we just do like warehouse space? Because the storefront is more expensive per square foot versus the warehouse, which is how we're actually running it. So we started going around town trying to find warehouse space. It seemed really expensive for what the cost was. So my dad, who used to be a general contractor, was like, hey, why don't we just go buy something and build it on our own? So we ended up going and looking around, seeing what we do. We ended up buying 5 acres off of Kyle Canyon, so like towards Mount Charleston. Ended up building a 5,000 square foot detached garage with 16-foot clear. So like we were doing this. We were building the house that similar to what my parents had built previously. So you had the main house where they could live, which would be separate from the business, and then you had what I was going to say. This is going to be like how we grow this to the next level. For like an idea of how much networking and stuff that was there, I put over 10,000 linear feet of Category 6 cable, Cat 5, Cat 6, Cat 6 cable through the buildings. So, so like we would do a drop like every so often, so I could have computers everywhere, so people could pull up orders, do the picking, etc. So,
And a lot of that was just from your experience of understanding, I'm assuming, understanding technology and then also understanding the business part of it, right? Because
the ops aspect, yeah.
Understanding that, okay, if I have this huge warehouse, if I have to go pull, look it up here and then go all the way to the other end of the warehouse to pull something out, I mean, I think you had that perfect combination of business sense and technology, technological knowledge as well, right? To know that, say, hey, I'm going to run all this Cat 5. I'm going to have computers everywhere because this is going to help run my business more efficiently. Wow, that's...
So if you had like an order and the order said, widget A, and you're like, well, what the hell is widget A? That's where someone would go to the computer, pick it, look at the item so you can actually see what the visual was, so you can make sure that you're pulling the correct item.
Was it also doing location for you at that point to say, okay, widget A is in this one, or we weren't that...
So earlier in the process, when we're talking about saving time, and I told you about like the shipping labels and how I fixed that, one of the things I observed was the pulling order. And the pulling order, we would go into the garage, we'd go boom, 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 and we'd just go all over the place to fill an order. And what was occurring is when you add multiple people, now you got people crossing and you don't have the space and like everything else. So early into the process, what I did was I got the order from the customer, and then when we went to print the order, I put it through a process that did 2 things. It was referred to as my 2-pass. The first pass was where I had it with a special formatting for the aisles, and it would reflect for the box figure, so for the heavy items. And it was listed in a way that was like 1A1, 1B, 2, etc. And I set it up so it would tell the location, and it allowed for a single pulling pass. So you would do like a snake through the warehouse, and then you have all your heavy items. You go drop that off at your shipping station. Then you go back for a second pass for all the loose items, which would also be a snake type pattern. So now what occurs is anybody pulling orders go through the same path, so they don't actually bump into each other, so there's no double backing or whatever it is. That I then also extended when we had the storefront, so that I could do the double pass, so it became like a 3-pass, where it was the box figures, the loose figures, but also if there's anything that was in storage in those 7 storage units behind, you could go into the storage unit place behind us, which had the 7 different units, and you could drive in an S-type shape to go visit the different things, stop, unlock, get the box figures or wherever else it was, put it back in. So like if we want to have multiple vehicles or people going, like
That's smart. I mean, that's something that, wow, I never would have thought of something like that to the point where, yes, labeling it, but to even define the pattern of how you're going to go through and pick this up. I mean, that's
Yep. So when we went from our house to the shop, I spent time similar like what I would if I was to program or something. I would say it was on the ops side where I figured out the layout of the shop and how to optimize to get it so that we wouldn't run into these items or these problems. And then so it was like, hey, apply an engineering mindset to the actual physical infrastructure of the warehouse to do that. And to me, like when I look at these like really successful, like Amazon and their fulfillment centers, that's so amazing. Like the stuff that Bezos did with Wilkie. So like if the Everything Store, that's a great book. I don't know if you've read that, but that's a great book to listen to. If
it is. So I actually did. There was somebody I worked with. She moved to a different role, but she recommended that book. She's like, you should read this book. It talks about their early foundings, and it touches a little bit on the AWS side. But one of the things that she mentioned is read it so that you understand the mindset of it's the Everything Store, but everything that went behind it, like how they did the warehouses, the idea behind all of it, and it was structured in such a way. I think that now, if you look at it, everything's automated. The robots that comes from the early beginnings, like similar to you, right? Like you were thinking about that to where if that technology was now available to you, you could probably say, okay, I can set these robots and they're not going to crash into each other because you have a defined path.
when I was at IBM, IBM acquired Tririga, one of the companies. We haven't got to this part of the story, but when IBM acquired Tririga, they were very big on patents and things of that nature, and they had this big video that you watch, inspiration. And as they're going through it, I had this idea of how to automate warehouses. So it was have these like linear actuators that would push up and then have a transfer ball. So instead of like the rollers like you do on a conveyor belt, it's a sphere and it can go in any direction. So the idea of this is if you have a box and you put it there, you can shift the box in any direction. So what I thought was, what stops you from increasing or raising these up so it slides down like a hill? Now coordinate that so it's like a wave, and then the box serves to wherever it is, and then you have a whole floor or warehouse with this. So I ended up coming up with this idea, running it past several of my buddies at the time. It's funny, so one of my buddies now who's in that group is a fellow over at Walmart, and another is a principal engineer over at Meta. So like this was like a really good like and then I think one of the guys, I think he's still over at Amazon. So really good, smart group of people. Ended up really polishing it, and I think we had 2 or 3 pens that came out of that. But the general idea of that automation really took off when I think Amazon bought Kiva Systems for 885 million. So then all of a sudden it was like double down. They ended up yeah. So like we got attention from leadership, they got it, and then they poured in some backing to help get those.
So and talk to me a little bit about the patent process. Sure. Right. So, I mean, you brought it up. So I know a couple people that have submitted for patents, and it's a way to kind of get recognition, but just touch on a little bit, because I know we're going to kind of run up on time here, and if you're okay with it, I mean, this has been fascinating. I'd love to bring you back at some point and kind of get more into the software development side, but
yeah.
For the patent, what's the process that you have to go through? And again, we don't have to go into a lot of detail, but what's the process to submit a patent? And I'm sure it takes a while. And then what happens to that because obviously IBM's, I'm assuming they're the ones paying for it. So what happens? You're the patent owner.
Yeah. No.
Or you're just the patent developer.
Yeah, so you are the inventor, but in this case, because it was through the company, IBM is the owner of the patent.
Okay.
So as part of that, these bigger companies where you're working, sometimes it becomes like like the old reference, like a feather in the cap or something, like an achievement that you're doing, especially at the higher tiers or the levels. If you get the patents around the areas or the products that you're working on, it helps introduce like a barrier to entry for the business around that. So normally if it's something that the company's developing or pursuing, that is valued more than if you had some random thing where in this case, the idea was interesting enough that IBM, and with the Kiva systems, that they put the money behind to get that. But prior to that, it wasn't sure if that was going to be the case or not. In the group that I was working with, one of the gentlemen was a patent agent, meaning that he wasn't a patent lawyer, but he was able to help write the technical drafts that could be submitted, and then the lawyers would review it for it. So he was doing that on the side job, so he understood the process. In parallel of that, the gentleman who is now the fellow over at Walmart, he got in contact with a master inventor at IBM. So he started to come and talk to us as a group and kind of like said, hey, here's the process, this is what you do. IBM had their own particular process that you would go through. You go step A, step B, you do so much details, you have to do initial write-up. You share that, and then what occurred was, because we had the patent agent on our team, the format of what we did aligned more to what was going to be for the submission, so it just made it a little bit easier. It's kind of like getting pseudocode versus just business requirements, kind of one of those.
Okay.
So now that process we went through, we submitted it inside their database. It gets reviewed by like a peer review or groups that look at it. They say, hey, what's the value of this? Is there a market for it? So they go through some filters to say, is this viable? But there's also other things like, is there prior art? There's like a series of things that kind of get vetted out. And then if it's like, hey, this is good, this looks like something they want to do, and then normally the patent agent will do like a draft of the patent. We'll run it past you for feedback, where you'll then go through, share some details if you want it revised, etc. But there's normally two different things. One is, I think, the initial filing, which comes to like a particular date, and that's where it gets like where it's enforceable. And then the actual patent submission that goes behind that. So this can extend for a period of time. Outside of that, I don't think I have any patents. Well, I started to pursue my own patent on the side. I think around, I forget, it was like 2014, 2016, somewhere thereabouts. I had the idea of creating a autonomous robot to pick up dog poop. And so think like Roomba, but go around to identify dog poop and everything else. That was interesting because there's dynamics behind that make it difficult. And so I ended up having to study like consistencies, grippers, and things of that. But when it all was said and done, the short story is I know my
And pursuing your own patent, did that come, I'm assuming, after doing it at work and understanding a little bit of the process, or was it?
Yeah. So I learned.
You get exposure, and then all of a sudden you're like, hey, I can do this.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the things too, was I left IBM, and after I had left IBM, I was working at a company which was more friendly to you being able to do like your own side stuff. Before I left IBM, I think I ended up submitting, I think, like 30 different patent ideas through their system. So this was years ago, but I was like looking at biometrics, and I was trying to figure out like what can you do biometrics. So I even got to the point where I was like, hey, could you do biometrics of the pattern from the tongue? So I ended up as this one of these ideas, and then I found out some researchers in Japan already had the idea, so it was prior art. But I thought I was like, who the hell thinks of this stuff?
Well, it's once you get exposure, right? Once you're exposed to the patent process and you're just like, oh, you can patent all these different things, then
Yeah.
I'm sure your imagination starts to kind of go through and like, oh, well, this is going on. Has somebody thought of this? And
Yep.
There have been a couple times where I'm like, I wonder if, and you start looking at, man, I can't believe somebody's already thought about this
Yeah.
5 years ago.
So what I found out, or the pattern that I was recognizing, is that if you had 4 ideas, 3 of them have normally already been thought of. So then if you had 16 ideas, 4 of them are possibilities, but of those 4, only one of them is actually probably like worth considering. So what will occur is you can go through this brainstorming thought process or whatever it is. Don't ruin the process. Like just go through, like create like a huge list of items. And if you're creating a business or if you're doing a startup or something, this is kind of what you're trying to do too, is you try a bunch of different things until you find something that you think you can scale and make work. So in this case, like you have the 4, 3 of them fell and one's a possibility. And then of those, if you have enough ideas, you can find like a couple, you don't need 100 really good ideas. You just need one really good idea that you can identify is a good idea and that you can actually operate towards very effectively.
Yeah, and that's something I read. It's part of that book, right? Is fail and fail fast, right? Just make decisions, and that's something that whether it's patents, whether it's ideas, whether it's your job, like it's okay to fail, right? Like try it multiple times. If I apply for 2 jobs, what are the chances that I'm going to get them? But if I apply for 20 or 30, again, within reason. Like I could apply to 200, but like at that point you're going too far. But like you said, if you're being a little bit more targeted,
Yeah.
I think it's okay to go through that process. Okay, hey, what? But not just go through and say, okay, hey, I didn't get it, and be done and resubmit the same thing. Okay.
Yes. How do you improve or iterate on that? I think. So in my career's taken me down a very good path, I think. And this is where I'm skipping over some of the stuff and we can go more in depth on those in the future. But in my career, I've gone from being like tech support, to running my own business, to software engineer, to senior software engineer, to lead software engineer, to manager when one of my managers quit. And then that kind of got me into the management role because we're in the middle of a big project. I want to make sure it was successful. Didn't want to cause interruptions to the rest of the team, etc. And then I got inspiration to stay in management by Tony Hsieh, who was the CEO over at Zappos. And he was very interesting because when he went to Harvard, he actually won the international ACM programming competition with his team. So we're talking like world-class programmer being able to run these businesses. And I was like, hey, what's the difference between what he did with Zappos to make it into this billion-dollar company versus what I was doing with War Toys? So I ended up like asking a ton of questions, got the pleasure to be able to ask him questions and get answers. And going through that whole process, like I learned a ton. This then led from Zappos to COVID hitting, and I did a internal transfer to AWS. So I was then working for Amazon so like a Fang type company. So unfortunately for myself, when Amazon had their layoffs, I was part of that. And this was not the initial layoffs. This was after like the second or third wave had already occurred. So the job market was already saturated. So recently, that was rough because now it's like, oh hey, like although I had a ton of IC or individual contributor background with the majority of my career, I only had like 5 or 6 recent years outside of like my management and my ownership of my business from before. So like together it's over 10 years or whatever it is, but you got to be able to tell the story, convince people, yes, I'm worth hiring, etc. So now I'm on the job market again, had to do my resume, AI is now around, I found that the AI was very valuable in helping me summarize some bullets. So I'd be like, hey, here's a paragraph, summarize this in 2 sentences. Like, so I really utilized it to improve my resume quite a bit. But I ended up, the whole time period took me about 6 months. And the reason why is early into that process, I got some job offers, but the job offers were pretty low for what I was trying to target for my total compensation. And the only jobs that I could find that would really give me the compensation I was looking for would be the bigger companies that were also allowing remote type roles or positions. So now everybody and their brother wants to have a remote role position that also pays well. So the competition is extremely high. So I ended up going through the process. I used LinkedIn, I used Okta, I used a bunch of these different sites. And I would say that on average, I was probably applying to 50 different places every week, which then helped create me a pipeline where I would also have interviews throughout the week. So I'd have 2 or 3 interviews, and my resume was diverse enough in that I've had exposure. Like, a lot of the majority of my background has been Java. So JavaScript is like more my like bread and butter. But I've done stuff in Go, C++, Python, and all these different things. So my resume will catch the attention of different people. And I'd say probably the trend that I've seen recently is that I think the Python jobs is super high as far as the quantity, because that's where I got a lot of like potential interviews with. My Java background, as strong as it was, got me a decent portion. But then the third group that I would get picked into would be the Go. And what I found is, from a like technical, like where the super big brains are, the people who were these like Go ones, these are like more like super high volume web services, really know their stuff. These are people who probably like really understand like compile level like stuff. The I would say the Java group would probably be the next batch from the technical depth, and then I would say Python. Now, and the Python is kind of like this mixed bag, because Python can be utilized for like data science, engineering, and things of that nature, in addition to actual programming. So I've seen where there could be more, like some of the development may not be as stringent as what I've seen with like the Java versus like the Go, but it was crazy, because I would go through these interviews, and I was like, my main thing was like, number one, you got to be okay with getting the number of rejections that you're going to get from the automated systems. So you got to have a thick skin. After that, you have to go through the interviews where you may or may not get in. And I know at some of the places where we were interviewing, I saw as much as like a 90% rejection rate for the candidates going through. So when you're applying to these jobs, you may have to go through 10 different interviews before you get an offer. And then your third aspect is, what is the compensation that's behind that, which then makes it does so you have to have it so that they want you at the price that you're willing to accept. So it's very tough, but the goal is have a growth mindset. If you go through an interview and you don't get it, you need to pause, you need to reflect, you need to understand what could I have done better. If it was something from a technology gap or something, then you spend more time interviewing. And the goal with that is, hey, you identified a gap, you're going to improve it, so the next time you interview, that gap's not going to be there anymore. If it is a question where it was an awkward conversation, or your story didn't give the impact that you needed for what you had, then you need to kind of reflect on how do you improve that story so that you can tell it better the next time. And once you develop these skills, what I found is you tend to go from no offers to like a series of getting all the offers.
No, that's very important, and it's something that I think a lot of people are just like, well, I'm getting rejected. well, there's a reason, right? Take time, reflect, maybe network, ask somebody, right? And really try to understand why. And eventually, even interviewing is a skill set of its own, right? And there's plenty of websites, people, mock interviews. I mean, I've touched on it, I think, on 2 different episodes where just actually mock with somebody, right? It's one thing to say, hey, I know my story, I know what I'm going to talk about. Go through and just have somebody ask you, write down questions and just have somebody else ask you and verbalize them out loud. Or, I talk to somebody and they'll talk to themselves, right? Like as I'm going through an interview, I'm like, what's a potential question? And answer it, but not answer it just mentally, but like actually verbalize and say, hey, this is my experience in talking. I'm like, man, I don't like the way that sounded. Let me try it a different way. So definitely.
I found that as an interviewer, that sometimes you'll end up asking questions, and then the response will not answer what was asked either. So the best prep that I've seen for that, like Amazon has behavioral questions. There's a book called, I think, Amazon Behavioral Questions or something along those lines. And inside of that, it has a list of questions that are commonly used, like from the knowledge base that you can come across. And they are normally worded in a way that are difficult. And if you just answer them at the surface level, you could fail the interview, because the goal or intent is not only, hey, name a time where you had a difficult situation for whatever it was. If you just share that difficult situation and you don't say, and this is how I got past it, or this is how we improved, or whatever it is, that tell in portion is so important. I can't express it enough. But if you go through an interview and they ask you a question and you don't give them the data or the feedback points, sometimes they're sitting there and they're looking for specific data points because they're assigned like a core value or a leadership principle specific to saying, yes, is this person going to be a fit for the company based on what we're interviewing for? And if you can't give them that data in a clean, succinct way, you'll get rejected just for that.
Well, I know we're coming up on time, and I know we didn't get to the bulk of your career, the software, the part that I was interested in, but the story about just everything you learned to pick up those skills early on in your career, I mean, I found fascinating, right? I was just like, man, I never would have thought of some of the things that you did, as far as kind of, hey, the automation, the process improvement. I've always thought about, well, how do I improve this area of my one, sometimes you get tunnel vision, like how do I fix this one thing? So I'm sure people will get a lot of value out of this. I hope that at some point, in a couple months, when we can find time to sync up again, to come back and kind of continue the conversation and learn more about how you managed, some of the questions I had were about leadership and skills. But just to kind of wrap it up real quick, and I don't want to take up too much time, but if you can even just in that initial portion, so what do you think, if you had to leave one key takeaway, what is something that in that early part of your career that you think that's a skill, a lesson that you think is kind of woven throughout your entire career? And we'll talk about the later part, at some point, but at the beginning, what's something, was it process improvement? Was it, business acumen? What do you think has served you from early on?
It's a interesting question. And it can go a bunch of different ways, but it's kind of like, what does it boil down to? And in order to be or pursue to be the best at whatever you do, I think you need to have the passion for that, or the interest and the desire. And if you can get yourself into the mindset of pursuing that, and then you're willing to put in the time, and you're willing to do whatever it takes to succeed, to say, hey, look, I'm going to go through with the mindset of, I am going to get this. I'm going to figure it out. Even if it takes 2-3 days, 2-3 weeks, like you just pursue it and you get it done. that perseverance, that mindset, following that passion and not being derailed from what you're after, I think is key. I think the one of the toughest programming problems I had was a challenge problem from Professor Larmor, who had 2 PhDs, one in mathematics and one in computer science. And normally, if I was up against a tough problem, within a day or two of when I'm sleeping, I'm thinking through and my brain's still processing this stuff, and I would normally come up with a solution. Either after a day, 2 really tough days, it's 3. This particular problem, this challenge problem, ended up taking me 3 weeks. Like my brain was actively engaged trying to solve this for 3 weeks. So the intent or goal behind that is, at any time you can give up. But if you're really passionate and you're really perseverant and you're really after it, you won't, and you will eventually get it. So my main thing would be have the passion and pursue that passion, and really pursue to be the best in whatever you do.
That's awesome. Well, thanks again. I appreciate you coming on. And for everyone else, I hope you really enjoyed the episode. And as always, make sure you plug in and download all this knowledge. Thanks.